Good morning, everybody. Happy Saturday. I hope you all are doing well. If you can, in the comment section, let me know that you all can hear me as I get ready to get us started. I am super excited to be here with you. I'm excited to get a chance to meet all of you all. We've got a lot to cover in a little bit of time. I want to say thank you so much to Stephanie at Bird Bar Place and the rest of the Bird Bar Place staff for having me today as we have this conversation around being able to manage and navigate seasonal changes, taking care of our mental and our emotional. I think this is so important. So I just want to say thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy Saturday to be here with me, with us, as we have this conversation. I see you in the chat. Thank you so much for the confirmation, Victor. I appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So my name is Richard Taylor Jr. Oh God, so many titles as far as like the work that I do. I'm a mental health advocate though. And so within that, I run a company called Tailor-Made Empowerment. Through Tailor-Made Empowerment, I'm a full-time speaker, author of 7 books, which we'll get a chance to talk about today. Each of you all in the space will be leaving with a free signed copy of my latest book, my 7th book, The 31 Days of Power, a simplified approach to everyday mental health. Thank you to Bird Bar Place for making that happen. And I just want to make sure that we are aware of, you know, their time and effort in order to like really making this event something super special. So if we can show them some love in the chat for just being so open and willing to constantly providing the love and the care and support in any way possible. And I love that because I think that community is so important. I believe that it can literally change and shift our lives for the better. So thank you all for that, for purchasing books. For everybody in the space today. I believe Stephanie might talk a little bit more about that in the chat as far as being able to get things together for you all to get those. Outside of that, I run a podcast called Between the Dream. Been running it for about 5 years now. The focus is mental and emotional wellness. But essentially, I like to take conversations from everyday life, from our own circumstances, from where we are, and just have some fun with it, but also being able to give us some tools and resources that we can walk away with. And so essentially, that's me. I also sit on the board of directors for NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, East Side over in Redmond. So my life is really big in the space of just trying to help when it comes to our mental and our emotional. So that's a little bit about me. Once again, my name is Richard Taylor Jr., originally from Chicago, Illinois. Been living here in the Seattle area now for the last a few days from now to make 6 years, and I'm really excited about that. I know it's early, kind of, for some of us. Pardon me in advance. Look, I've literally had about 6 Christmas cookies that I shouldn't have, but when I walked into the co-working space here this morning, they had them out. And so I think I feel the sugar rush coming in, or it might be the pre-workout that I had this morning when I was at the gym. Either way, I got a ton of energy right now, and I'm super excited for this time together. So real quick, I just want to make sure that you all are aware. This is obviously a safe space, right? When we have these conversations today around our mental, around our emotional, I want us to understand that in this is a safe space. I also want to encourage us to take the time to lean in when I talk about traumas and specifically triggers, right? I know that a lot of times when we have conversations that can be triggering or that can rattle us a little bit, it's very easy for us to kind of hit the flight, fight, fawn or freeze mode, right? I want to encourage us to lean in today though, right? This opportunity that I believe that we have when it comes to dealing with triggers that gives us a quick moment to where we can actually take the time to just say, you know what, before I allow the fear of this to cause me to feel like I need to move out of this space, I'm going to stay here for a second and lean in. And why am I encouraging us to lean in? I believe that when we take the time to lean in, what it does is it gives us an opportunity to actually embark upon a moment of healing, right? For us to start finding ourselves in a space of freedom. And I think that's really important. So I want to jump into this before we get into this quick conversation and PowerPoint piece. Why am I so passionate about this space when it comes to our mental and our emotional? Simply put, if I could take you back real quick, sixth grade Richard, 10, 11 years old, my mom and dad transferred me out of the only thing that I had known up until that point as far as the educational system was concerned. I was in a private Christian school at the time, and literally after that, they transferred me over into my first public school, right? And so in this, the change was different, right? Like I said, I'm from Chicago. I don't know how many of you all know about Chicago, but Chicago is a different culture and climate, specifically around the fact that we have a heavy roasting culture. And I'm not talking about the roast that you see on Comedy Central. We are way worse than that, right? And so in this, it starts from a very early age. I will literally yo mama you to death. And in that was the culture. For me at the time, it was really interesting because there were so many things happening in that space, right? The change of school, the shifting of being out of one space that I had known previously for the last 6 years, and then coming into a new space. But then you couple that with the fact that during that time, I was short and chubby. And in this, my weight was always kind of like the first thing that would be brought to attention of my peers or myself. And so when this happened, the first day I come into school, one of the students walks up to me in the big gymnasium as we're all getting together, poke me in the stomach, hoo-hoo, makes the Pillsbury Doughboy noise. Everybody gets a good laugh, and that was the start of it. Here's the reality. For a while, I was able to hold my own, right? But what ended up happening probably halfway through the year, I realized that in this space, what started off as jokes and roasting started transitioning over more and more into bullying and malicious intent. And so when this happened, I didn't know how to deal with it. I found myself in a really interesting position to where I was nervous coming into school. What would it look like today? What's going to happen? Is somebody going to say something to me? Am I going to have to deal with a bully today? Am I going to get embarrassed in this space? And so it really started to mess with my mind, and I didn't have anybody to talk to at the time about it, right? Like, if we can be honest, I know for me during this time frame in Chicago, and this would have been around 1999, 2000, in that space and time, we were lucky if we had one counselor or one therapist in our school in the midst. And that didn't really help when it came to really seeking out any kind of guidance or advice. And I'm gonna be real with y'all. Look, I know you could talk to me in the chat if you want to, but I know that for many of us, we might have had some similar experiences when it came to opening up. For me, I felt like I was hitting a wall in every space when it came to talking about what I was feeling. This immense amount of sadness, right? This anxious feeling of what's going to happen today? What am I going to see next? And it didn't help either when it came to being able to talk to my family about it, right? Mom and dad always telling me what happens in this house stays in this house, right? And so in this, there was this huge piece of, you're not going to tell anybody about this because it's not a big issue. It's not a big deal. Then I was met with the fact that I grew up in the church, and in the space of growing up in a Christian household, I was always met with the, you're not praying hard enough. You're not close enough to God. And so in this, for a long time, I felt like there was no way out. And in this, I started not only internalizing more these feelings and these things, but I started to feel like a failure within it. And so in this one day during the 6th grade year, like I said, I talked about the trigger piece. I want to be mindful of it. We're going to have 2 quick trigger warnings throughout me sharing this part. And like I said, if you feel yourself in that space, I just want you all to lean in a little bit with me, okay? And so in this, I found myself coming into school that day, playing the Pokemon card game during recess. I beat all of my classmates in it, got me some brand new cards. Everything was cool. Went to the boys' bathroom to use it right before recess was over. My bullies come in, and as they come in, they surround me. They start beating me up. They steal my Pokemon cards. I'm looking at the ringleader. Why are you doing this? And he says, because people like you can't defend themselves, so we do with you as we please. And in this, he was referring to the fact that I was an overweight kid, and I was one of the easy suspects, essentially, when it came to being somebody that they could pick on and bully. That day, I went home on the school bus full of anger, full of hatred, full of rage. and not at them for what they had done, but I was actually more angry and upset at myself for the fact that I couldn't defend myself. I didn't know what to do at that time. And then I felt this amount of hatred towards me personally because of something that I couldn't change at the time, which is my physical appearance. And so when this happened, I went home that day just sick and tired of it all. And I said to myself, what if I could change this? Maybe there's a way I can change this. I'm tired of being the one that they always pick on. I'm tired of being the one that they always come for. What if, and this is our first trigger warning, what if I could just cut some of the fat off of my body and everything would be okay? And in this moment, this was the first time that I was met with self-mutilation, right? Tried to hide it from my parents so they didn't know about it, hid it from my brothers before they got home. And in this, what I did not realize is that I was opening up the door to what would start transitioning over the next few years into suicide attempts. Now, interestingly enough, my mom and dad transferred me out of that school, put me into a different public school. So another shift, another change. And in this, though, the change was a little different this time. I was able to manage it a little better. I started shooting up in height, became a pretty decent basketball player, got to 6 feet tall by the time I was graduating from 8th grade. And then by the time I was getting ready to go to high school, life started changing tremendously. Freshman year, never realized I had a talent when it came to playing football, but literally freshman year, took the state of Illinois by surprise with the school that I was with. And in this, I started receiving scholarship offers galore. So it was an interesting shift. It was an interesting change because it went from being the bullied into now I'm in this space of popularity. I'm a jock. I myself had started to become a bully because I was socially accepted by so many others. And so in those changes that I was experiencing during that time, it put me in this position to where I kind of forgot where I came from. I forgot the fact that I used to be in that same seat. And so in this, I was caught up with all of the glitz and glam and everything that was happening. And as this happened, and even though I was getting these scholarship offers, what I did not realize was that the very issues that I had dealt with early on were still there. The depression was still there. The anxiety was still there, and it showed itself in so many different ways. It showed itself through the forms of not what we would typically consider when it came to the bullying anymore. It started to show itself from the standpoint of Richard was a high overachiever, and in being an overachiever, when things weren't met, whether it was family issues back at home, being that I'm a namesake to my father, or whether it was the fact that I didn't do well in a game or I didn't do well in a practice, and I'm always my biggest critic. In those moments, what I found was that I was in this position to where now I'm constantly tormented by these thoughts. And in the torment of all of this, it put me in a position to where I started to question my self-worth. So what started off as self-mutilation had then transitioned over into attempted suicides. By the time I was 14, I found myself now constantly in this space of, on a weekly basis, asking the question, is my life worth it? Why am I here? What purpose do I bring into this space? As all of these different changes were happening seasonally, I constantly questioned what the purpose was, but it wasn't just a question anymore. It started becoming attempts to say, well, if I can't find an answer to this, then maybe I don't need to be here. And so this led me all the way up into my senior year of high school. The only thing that I felt like I was really holding on to at that time was the aspect of sports. It was the fact that I was a highly touted football player. It was the fact that these scholarships, I felt like one of them was going to land me someday, somehow into the NFL, and I'd be able to change my family's life because my mom and dad weren't making a lot of money, but with the little bit that they did, they invested into myself and my brothers in activities that would keep us off the streets. And so when this happened, I really felt this huge weight to say that I have a responsibility now to do this, and I'm putting this on my shoulders. I took a hit during a game my senior year. I blacked out, woke up in the hospital. Doctors had run some tests, and only to find out that I had at the time what they had diagnosed as a heart murmur. And so when this happened, everything just kind of changed for me because of the fact that the doctors were starting to talk about how they didn't think that my chances of playing at the next level in college were going to be a thing. This was during the time where athletes were passing out on the fields and passing out on the courts with heart arrhythmias and all these other issues. And so it was a slim chance. And in that slim chance, the depression started to hit me a lot harder. I found myself writing more and more notes and letters of suicide. And in this, what ended up transpiring was that all of the colleges who were seeking me out found out about my condition, and they didn't want to take the risk or the chance. And so this change of a health diagnosis that at the time I was 17, I felt like I could overcome. Everybody was saying no. I felt like I was met with closed doors. So when this happened, I felt like, wow, what do I do now? So I had to go into college in what we would identify as the normal way, right? The traditional way of coming into school as just a student. I hadn't invested in the space of being a student because my mind had always been in another space. And so when that shift happened, that shift really took me into a space of a deeper bout of depression. College rolls around, my freshman year, I come in, I go to Northern Illinois University. And in this, I come in through what's called the Chance program. The Chance program is a space for students who either had high GPAs or low test scores or vice versa. And so for me, I always had a high GPA coming out, but I never did well with testing, specifically standardized tests, right? And so in this, I don't know who needs to hear this in this space. This ain't even a part of my presentation right now, but I just want to throw this out here because I don't know who we have. Maybe it's for you, maybe it's for students that you serve, maybe it's for your kids, whatever. Listen, you are not predicated. Your future is not predicated by a standardized test. I think this is so important to just make sure that we remind ourselves of when it comes to where we are in life. And the reason why I say this is because of the fact that during that time frame, I took the ACT trying to get into college. I took it 3 times, right? And in the 3 times that I took it, I got a 17 the first time, a 16 the second time, and a 15 the third time, right? I'm testing super low on it. The very areas that I tested low in were in reading comprehension and writing, right? Why am I putting this out here? Because I think it's important for us to know that in moments and times where we have certain labels put on us, when we have certain titles, right, from people's opinions and their words and things like that placed on us, it can be very easy for us to start questioning our self-worth, right? It's very easy for us to be met with imposter syndrome. I just want to let you know that that's not the case, right? Like I said, this is not a part of my message, but I feel the urge to at least put this out here. The very areas that I struggle with have become the very areas that I've been able to thrive in. Over 40,000 self-published copies sold of each of these books, right? The student who at one point in time struggled when it came to reading comprehension, who at one point in time struggled, who flunked when it came to testing in this. I just need for you to know, listen, with the shifts and the changes that you've experienced in life with whatever it is, look, every test that comes your way, whether standardized or life, it is not the end of your life, and it does not determine the level of success. It won't stop you from being who you were meant to be. And I think that this is important for us to remember. At the time, I did not consider this when I got to college, though. So I came in through this Chance program. They let us know you will not graduate before 5 years, right? And so in this, I found myself dealing with the imposter syndrome. Nobody in my family, I'm a first-gen college student. Nobody in my family went before me. And so in not having an example, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to manage. And so for me, because of the fact that I was still dealing heavily with the reality that football was no longer a thing for me, I found myself in a really interesting position. From August of 2006 to January of 2008, the first almost 18 months of my college life, I spiraled out of control very, very quickly. I walked onto the college campus at 200 pounds, flew up to 370 pounds. I was dealing with physical health issues. I was dealing with the mental and the emotional issues to where I became higher when it came to the suicide piece, right? Like I was more prone to constantly trying to take my life while keeping it, swept under the rug. I found myself hopping into a relationship solely based off the fact that I felt like I was getting some form of validation, but in that validation, I did not realize that it would lead me to the next year and a half of being a victim of domestic abuse. And so in this, I didn't know what the self-worth piece was anymore for me. And then on top of that, I was failing in college with a 1.4 GPA for 3 semesters straight, being ready to be academically dismissed from the school. That takes us to January 21st of 2008. This was the day that Dr. King Day was celebrated on that year. And this same day, everything changed. I found out that my abuser was cheating on me, and it was essentially the icing on the cake from everything else that I was dealing with. We lived in the same dorm hall on the same floor. This is my final trigger warning. I had just finished washing dishes. We're going back and forth in a room. And as we're going back and forth, I literally, before blacking out, the final words I said were, if you don't give a care about me, then why should I give a care about me? If nobody else cares about me, why should I care about me? I took the first object that I had from the dishes that I washed, and it was a knife, and I took that blade down my wrist 5 times where the word love now sits on my arm. And after this, I wake up in a hospital with a doctor cleaning me up, asking questions, trying to make sure I'm fully there. And he lets me know, Mr. Taylor, you tapped the main vessel at the top of your wrist, but no blood will come out. He follows up to say, you've got a purpose in life, but now you need to figure out what it is. Little did this doctor know that purpose was the very thing that I had struggled with for so long. He didn't realize that this was the very thing that had put me in this position in the first place, feeling like I did not have one, right? And so in this, I had to sleep on that. The next day I wake up, my story just so happens to be in the school newspaper. And as it's in the paper, it's in the police beat. Most colleges have it when they have a campus paper. If the police were involved, it typically makes little small waves, right? Mine made bigger waves for a multitude of reasons. Mine made bigger waves because of the fact that I was highly active on campus. For every struggle that I had, I always found myself trying to cover it up and utilize a mask, right? So I was the president of a fraternity. I was one of the leaders of my school's gospel choir. I worked in the Residence Hall Association. I worked for our campus activity board. I did work for our student government association. And in all of this, I tried to have people see me in one way. But the reality is that internally I was going through, I was dying inside. And all of these changes were a huge part of that. And so when my story hit the paper, I said to myself, I either need to do this again and succeed, or I'm going to drop out. Hey, can we make sure all of our microphones are off, you all? Thank you. I said, I'm going to drop out and become another statistic and go back home to the city of Chicago. And when I had that thought, that same day, I ended up getting a call from a gentleman who ended up becoming my first mentor. He reaches out to me. He says, Richard, you made a mistake, but this doesn't have to be the end of your life. And I felt like this was the first time that somebody had saw me in all of my mess. And instead of judging me and ridiculing me, they gave me an opportunity. And so in this, he introduced me to this program called TRIO, Student Support Services. And with his help, I was able to start making some of the necessary changes. I got into counseling, even though I fought it nail and tooth, because I'm still dealing and battling with all of those misconceptions that I learned from family members or that I learned from society when it came to a Black man going to seek out therapy, right? And so in this, I had my own battle that I had to overcome within that. But I'm so happy that I did, because it gave me an opportunity to see the value within it and how it's not a thing of somebody trying to tell me about myself or to analyze me, but to actually give me tools and resources to help me heal and to become whole. And so this is why I'm so passionate about the space, because it was that help that caused this transition for me that allowed me to now start helping other people about, 12 or 13 years later, then here we are, right? So as we have this conversation today, I just wanted you all to kind of get a little bit of an understanding as to where my heart is with this and why I feel so passionate about the conversation of our mental, of our emotional, and where we are, right? So I want to go ahead and jump right on into this, right? Learning to champion seasonal changes. As we go through this conversation real quick, I just want us to be reminded, right, that I'm going to approach this in 2 separate ways. This conversation, part of it is going to be for us internally with things that we do, right? But then I also want us to be reminded that there's going to be a portion of this that is going to be, how can we help others, right? Because I do believe that there's a huge strength in the power of community for our mental and our emotional as we go through changes, in every season throughout life. So with that being said, I want to talk about the change aspect real quick before we jump into some tools and some real conversation. Changes look different for each of us, right? While the experiences, the causes, and the triggers are different, here's the reality. The result tends to be the same, and that result is an untimely shift. You can take the last 2.5 years with COVID as an example of that. You can take your life prior to that. Think of any change that you've had to deal with, specifically changes that usually are linked to moments in times of memories, i.e. going into the holiday season, right? As we move into this space, I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't affected by this, right? It's this time every year that I'm reminded how my grandfather, who was the matriarch of our family, he hasn't been here since 2006, how his death was literally the last time that, mind you, my grandparents had 11 kids, right? So we had a huge family, but his death was literally the last time that all of us were together, that the family feeling that I remember during my earlier life, it wasn't there anymore, right? And this could be the same for many of us, not necessarily with the death of a person, but it could be the change of a job, the change of a relationship, the change of a situation. Whatever it is, what we tend to find ourselves having happen sometimes is that with those changes, right, we can start to be so affected to it to where it shifts how we usually approach life in those moments. It shifts how we approach our investment to the priorities that we have, things that actually kept us in a healthy mental state, things that actually kept us in a good state when it came to how we chose to approach life, how we chose to approach whatever it is, right? And so in this, I want us to be mindful of the changes, right? I want us to actually take time to acknowledge that, yes, there are some things that have changed, and in those changes, I have changed as well. Whether good or bad, I think it's important for us to acknowledge it, right? And as we acknowledge the change, I think this gives us an opportunity to start leaning into a greater space. That leads me to my next point, right? I want to talk about this real quick. I want us to know that hope exists, right? There is hope. This comes from my 5th book called The Other Side, Freedom from Depression and Suicide, right? Now, I'm gonna be honest with y'all, right? When I first had this conversation of hope, it was actually inspired by something that I live through on a daily basis, right? Y'all know we're in holiday season. Richard got his Christmas red on. My little Snoopy Santa hat is sitting right over here behind this camera on my left side, right? And so in this, I love the holiday season. I've been out of all of my parents' kids, I'm the one that celebrates it. I'm gonna let y'all in on a secret that not a lot of people know. My tree usually goes up sometimes late September, early October, right? And most times it don't come down to February. By then, I just like to call it a Black History Month tree though, right? And so in this, my love for the holiday season, it comes from the space of music because I am a singer and I love great music, but then also to the movies, right? And so for me, we know our classics, Home Alone, Elf, we can go through the list, right? For me, my love of the holiday movies has actually extended over the last 7 years. And I know it's cheesy, but to the Hallmark and Lifetime side, right? One of the things I noticed in the space of Hallmark and Lifetime is that they do a phenomenal job in these movies of making you feel a sense of hope, right? And it's funny how it tends to look, right? The storyline never really changes. It's typically the same. You take the guy or the girl from the big city or from the small town that's living in the big city, working this job, trying to get the raise or get the promotion. Now they got to go back home for the holidays, but in order for them to get the job, they've got a task that they've got to do while they go back to the small town. When they get there, one or two things essentially happens, right? It's either some new person who is tearing the town down or trying to make some sort of change to the town, or it's an old fling that never flung. And in that, there's this level of tension and dissension for the first hour and 15 minutes of the movie, right? Like, I got to be around you, but I really don't want to be around you. And in this, we go to commercial break, right? Come back from commercial break. Next thing you know, the two individuals find themselves brush of a shoulder, gaze of an eye. All of a sudden, I don't hate you as much as I thought I did. I kind of like you. And then boom, 45 minutes later, we hit the end of the movie. There's that one big dramatic scene, probably in the last 5 to 10 minutes, where it's like, okay, are they going to make it? Are they not? Next thing you know, the day is saved. The town is saved. They fall in love. 3 days, boom, 90-day fiance coming right after that. And in that moment, it makes us feel like there's hope, right? It makes us feel hopeful. It's this space where it's like, that's great, right? But here's the reality though. What if we need to reframe our perspective on hope? What if that's not hope? And by that, I don't just mean what we see in that moment in time with the Hallmark movie, but I mean, what if that one big aha is not hope? What if hope is small baby steps done right, consistently over an extended period of time? So even though many of our recent experiences have given us opportunities to feel hopeless, specifically as seasons change, I need for us to know that hope still exists. But what if hope looks a little different? If we took it to the realm of sports, sometimes hope can look like the walk-off grand slam home run in baseball. It could look like the game-winning touchdown in football. It could look like the game-winning shot in basketball. But what if we, in the space of reframing our perspective on hope, what if it's not that? What if it's a field goal that ties it up and pushes us into overtime? What if it's simply a run batted in baseball instead of the big home run? And what if it's 2 free throws in basketball that put us in a position to where we can tie it up and extend the game? What if in our own lives, in those moments where maybe we have misidentified hope, or maybe our expectations put a different frame of hope in our vantage point, and in this, we have started to give up on the idea of hope when it comes to the changes that we see because our expectations weren't met in our time frame. I'm just here to let us know today that hope still exists, but what if we need to just shift a little bit what hope looks like for us in our lives? What if we've overlooked the small things that have given us an opportunity to find hope again? And you might find yourself questioning, right? Does hope really exist? So I want you to consider these 2 components as we move forward in this conversation. And you don't have to answer it to me, but take time to consider this with yourself. What have you placed hope in during seasonal changes? People, experiences, places, right? What have you placed hope in? And in those, right, have they actually been beneficial to you? Secondly, what would a perspective shift of hope look like for you? What would allow you to start feeling like hope exists again as you find yourself dealing with the change of seasons, whether that is the seasonal affect that we're in right now as the days are getting darker earlier, and as we are no longer in the space where we got the consistent, 2 to 3 months of like good sun and weather. What would hope look like for you? In this, I want to take us to our next piece, which actually comes from the book that you all are getting from me today. It's the first chapter from the 31 Days of Power book. This chapter is called We All Have a Mental Health. And I think this is really important for us to consider with ourselves as we move forward within our own lives dealing with changes. And why is this? Because I think a lot of times it's very easy for us to sometimes gloss over this and not realize the importance of this one component right here. We all have a mental health. I remember the first time I presented this portion, and it wasn't on purpose. I was at a conference back in 2018 with a group of mental health professionals. And as I'm answering questions during the Q&A session right after my keynote, I don't know why, but immediately that was my response to this lady's question, right? I was like, we all have a mental health. And then I tried to break it down, but before I could, she hit me with the big Karen energy, hopped up and was like, I ain't got no mental health issues. I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, whoa, slow down. Let's take it back real quick. It was one of those like, oh man, like this is low key how Chris Rock felt when he saw Will walking on stage. And I was like, lady, please, before you hit me, let me explain. And this is how I had to break it down to her. Just like we all have a physical health, when it's not invested into, we can see issues arise. It's the same with our mental. We all have a mental health, right? It's not a bad thing to have a mental health, right? The same way that we have a physical, we've got a mental, and we've got to be able to take the time to invest into it, to take the time to learn it, and to be able to start pouring into it, right? Now, hear me. Your mental health, no matter what state it's in, is not a burden. I need for us to make sure that we understand this. I want to backtrack real quick, though, too, because I think it's highly important for us to realize that we cannot take these moments and somehow start separating ourselves from individuals who do struggle. Remember what I said when that lady heard me on the stage? She said, I don't have no mental health issues. I don't know what you're talking about. And I followed up to say to her, I'm not saying that you have a mental health issue. I think it's very important for anybody on this call who has found themselves in a space where you've been diagnosed, you struggle, you deal with the mental illness, you are no less than the person who doesn't, right? For those of you all who find yourselves having to figure out and navigate your mental health in some very ugly states and times, I need for you to know that you are still worthy, you are still valuable, you are not controlled by your mental illness, you are not controlled, you are more than the sum of a diagnosis. And I think this is so important because a lot of times it's very easy for us to look at others who we think aren't struggling, and in this we start to judge ourselves as if we're doing something wrong, or we start to look at ourselves ourselves as a burden. I'm just here to let you know you're not. You're still beautiful. You're still worthy. Your life still has so much purpose. You can still do so many phenomenal things, illness, diagnosis, or not. You still have that within you, right? So I want to ask this question for us to consider. What are we doing to take care of ourselves, specifically to take care of our mental health? I want to encourage us to take the time to start prioritizing our health, specifically our mental health. Let's learn to prioritize, and take advantage of self-care moments, even if it's not presented in the ways that we desire, right? This is something that I speak so heavy on with the groups that I work with, right? Because I know a lot of times it's very easy for us to think like, man, all I need is that quick little, 2-week trip to the island on the sand with bottomless mimosas, and boom, everything is going to be good by the time I get back. That's not the reality, right? What if it doesn't come in that space right now for us? What if it's literally us taking just 30 minutes a day to be able to take some time to invest into ourselves with something that is life-giving, that is helping us, right? What if it's not the thing that we desire or maybe even need in that moment? I don't want us to overlook the smaller components that can help us in those moments of self-care, right? So let's be mindful of prioritizing our health, even in the changes of seasons. Remember what I said at the top of this conversation when we got into the PowerPoint. I talked about how when change happens, so does our investment into priorities, right? So I want us to consider these three things, right? Have you prioritized yourself during these last 2 years specifically? Because I know with the change of COVID, it's just kind of poured more on to the fire that was already there for many of us in our lives in different seasons, right? In what ways have you made yourself and your well-being a priority? And have your efforts been effective? Take some time to consider this. If you all want this PowerPoint too, I can easily just mail it over to Bird Bar. And make sure that you all can get it so you can come back to this too. But I think reflection is highly important when it comes to us being able to take the time to move forward. The next place that I want to go in, and this comes from the 31 Days of Power book as well, is the power of community for our mental health, right? Our experiences and willingness has the ability to help rebuild and restore the mental and the emotional state of the communities and the people that we serve, the folks that we're around, our families, our kids, our parents, doesn't matter who it is. I think it's important for us to understand that each of us has a respective and needed story, a respective and needed experience. And in this, I just want to encourage the willingness in that to say that you have something that somebody else needs. I know it's very easy for us to not always want to be present, or we're going through with our own lives. We're dealing with distractions. We're dealing with issues and struggles of our own. And sometimes it puts us in a position to where we just don't feel like it. I just want to encourage us in those moments of don't feel like it to lean in and push a little more when it comes to being willing, because you have something that somebody else needs, right? So how can we help in the process of restoration as we're going through seasonal changes and we see people struggling? I want to encourage us to do two things. First, let's take the time to just understand that there is power in us being direct and asking how we can help. A lot of times when we know that our people are struggling, or people that we're connected to are struggling, it's very easy for us to dance around it, right? I don't want us to dance around it. I want us to be direct and asking the questions of how we can help. The second thing, I think it's important for us to take the time to lean in with people. And when I say lean in, I'm specifically talking about going above and beyond just the quick, like, hey, how you doing? Okay, cool, great, right? But no, like actually spending time with folks around us, with our community, with our people, right? Taking those few extra minutes to have that conversation, because it could legitimately be life-saving. And I want us to be reminded of that. I think it's also important for us to make sure that we're creating safe spaces to air out issues, i.e. today's conversation, right? Here's the reality. Some of the solutions that will help us to restore our communities, they reside in spaces that allow us to see and understand the issues that we have going on. So with this, I want us to consider, before we move into this next part, I want us to consider what it is that we could do, right, to make a deeper investment into the health and the well-being of those around us. Like, is it just a conversation? Is it us just having more of a little bit of a check-in during this holiday season? You might be connected to somebody who this is a time frame where they typically go through grief because of the fact that they miss the folks that they once had, or maybe they miss a certain lifestyle that they once had, whatever the case might be. How can we create some safe spaces for those around us, for our specific families, right? For our direct, our children. How can we create spaces if we haven't been able to already? I think this is wildly important because I think that this could actually be really helpful in being able to get some of the answers to the questions that we have when it comes to how we can help. As we move back into the resource part, I want us to consider this, right? For all of us, when it comes to ourselves dealing with the seasonal changes, what's in your hands, right? I think that we've got to consider the power that we possess. I know a lot of times when we have conversations around mental health and when we have conversations around being able to overcome struggles, what we tend to see a lot of times is this defeated approach because of the fact that we feel like it has to be rocket science sometimes in order for us to be effective. That's not the case, right? A few things I want to give you in this when it comes to the power that you possess, right? The first thing that I think could be really important for us, we have to be able to monitor and limit our intake on a personal and professional level. And when I say intake, I'm talking about all of it, right? What we are watching, what we're feeding ourselves via social media, via the media, what we are taking in when it comes to the stresses of life, right? How can we start to monitor and limit certain things? That way we're not allowing it to become a greater part of us and then starting to eat away at us. The next thing I need for us to do is to understand that it's okay for us to take time to feel what we feel, but in that we cannot stay there within the feeling, right? I would do you a disservice if I just said, no, ignore the feeling. No, here's the reality. You are going to feel what you feel. And as you feel it, I think it's important. You need to be able to sit with it. But as you sit with it, I think it's important for us to reflect. And as we reflect, realize that we can't stay there. And also understanding that feelings are fickle. They can be here 1 minute and gone or change 10 minutes later, right? So in this, how can we take the time to do that? The next thing I want us to do when it comes to championing our changes seasonally, listen, it is okay to say no. We must acknowledge and set boundaries, right? Here's the reality. Setting boundaries now makes us more effective later for the people that we're around, for the people that we serve, for those of us around. And I need for you to know you're not a bad person when you take the moment to say no. Your no is going to help you stay around and avoid burnout. Your no will help people later on. So here's the reality. You might feel like, oh, I got all of this stuff happening right now. Your no doesn't change the fact that moment can still go on without you, right? And so in this, please, in those spaces where you know your bandwidth is stretched thin and you feel the burnout coming, right? I want us to take time to say no, because I think as we do this, it will help us more than we know from the space of while we're going through changes already, let me not overcommit myself to things that can lead to a greater downfall later. And as we get ready to wrap this up, I want to encourage us to keep track, right? I believe that journaling is very important, right? When we talk about being able to take time to just jot down our experiences, where we are and what we feel. So in this, it doesn't have to be a paper. It doesn't have to be a novel. You can pull out your phone, pop in the notes, and just maybe 2 to 3 days out of the week or a little more, just kind of writing in those spaces what you feel, what you've experienced, because here's the reality. Journaling will give us an opportunity to identify patterns, triggers, and warning signs related to spaces of depression, right? Because usually when seasons change, that's one of the first things that we will start to see is the seasonal depression piece. And I want us to understand that if we can learn patterns ahead of time, we're giving ourselves an opportunity to win in the understanding and the moving forward of those emotions. And then finally, as we get ready to close this out, I want to encourage us to stay active and get moving. Now, listen, I'm not saying that you got to go and lift the gym. I'm not saying you got to go and run a marathon. All I'm saying is this: movement has the ability to help interrupt our anxious thinking and the actions that come with it, right? So in this, what are some things that you can do when it comes to getting out, getting moving? I know the weather is a lot more colder than we would typically expect for a November, December timeframe, right? But what are some things that you can do to help get yourself moving in those moments where you know the season's changing and you can feel the change within yourself? And then finally, I just need, coming from somebody who has for a long time had to deal with being their own worst enemy, I want to encourage you all around the idea of the power of grace, right? Get it in your mind that you deserve the same grace that you show to everyone else. You deserve that grace. So yes, you might struggle. Yes, you might find yourself in a tough position, but the reality is that in that you are an imperfect human being, you are flawed, and that's okay. In this, show yourself grace as you make mistakes, trying to figure out how to manage and navigate seasonal changes, where you are and what you're feeling. And then finally, with that being said, I just want to say thank you all so much, Bird Bar Place family. I appreciate you all. I want to close here with this one quote from my second book, Between the Dream. It's also the title of my podcast. It says, "You're not losing in life. You are not failing. You are simply between the dream." What is between the dream? It's the point between our present moment and our promise. I like to call that area in the middle the process. Between the dream is the process. I'm a firm believer that when we embrace our process, we can embrace our progress. And as we embrace our progress, we can walk into every promise, purpose, and plan meant for our lives. So with that being said, Bird Bar Place family, you are not losing in life. You are not failing. You are simply between the dream. Thank you all so much for your time. And I'd like to open the floor for any questions at this time. Questions can be asked in a multitude of ways. If you want to hop on the camera and audio, cool, so be it. If you want to ask in the chat, you have that permission. And if you just want to stay anonymous, you can send a private message as well. But I do want to answer any questions that you all might have at this time.
I'm just curious, like if you have a family member or a close friend who's going something that's really tough and you don't know how to support them, like what is some good advice that you would share?
That's actually that's a great question, Stephanie. So I think that it kind of goes back to what I talked about in the presentation, right? There's power in being direct, right? When we don't know how, I know a lot of times we don't necessarily just directly come with it, but I think being able to ask, right? And it's real simple, right? You could do it as easy as being able to say, "Hey, I noticed that things are different with you. I noticed that you seem a little different or a little off, right? And in this, I'm just trying to make sure, one, that you're okay, and two, see if there's anything that I could do to help." What asking the what's or maybe the who's within that, I think can be super beneficial too. Here's the reality though. Some people like myself, when I was going through, I had to go through a lot on my own because I was stubborn during that time. And whether it was the fact that I felt like I didn't deserve help, or the fact that I was too proud to actually accept it when it was offered, there came a point in time when I hit my lowest of lows at my final suicide attempt, where in those moments where I was seeking some form of help, I reflected back on the individuals who showed just a little bit of love or kindness or whatever it was, right? And the reason why I'm putting this out here is because maybe you, or for somebody else on this call, you might find yourself in a position where you feel helpless because you don't know exactly what to do. I want us to remember the power within our presence, right? People will remember how we made them feel in times of struggle. People will remember our love. They will remember our gestures. They will remember all of these things, right? And so even though you might not see it right now, what you actually have happening is the sowing of a seed. The sowing of a seed that says, yo, like at a given time, when things get bad for them, they're going to know that you're a safe space. They're going to remember that you're a safe space. So I need for us to understand too, that our investment into helping our people, if, outside of being direct and asking questions and trying to just really see there, sometimes with what we're doing in the now, it might not necessarily be for the now, right? It's for the now kind of to hold things over, but I think you will actually see more of a benefit later on. So I think being present is always important. Let's make sure too that, say for instance, we get them to open up as we're coming to them. I want us to be really mindful of our approach within there, right? Like, let's not respond in alarming ways, because I think this can actually close people back down, right? And when I say alarming ways, if somebody shares something with you that might be a little tough or maybe unexpected, it's important for us to make sure that we're not like responding in that moment with a freaked out reaction, right? But being able to just take a step back and hear them out, right? Being supportive, right? Validating them when we need to, or when they need it. I think some of those can be really helpful. So thank you so much for that question, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. Okay. Yeah, I think that's really important. Just like I'm thinking back about my own like sibling and having a rough time, I didn't really know what to do, but your advice on just asking is powerful, I think, and thinking about like my own life too. Um, when I had struggled through depression and like just having a friend be there for me, like really that presence and just trying was
Yeah.
super impactful.
Yeah, a lot of
Uh,
times we don't ask, right? We just, and that's tough. I mean, I know it's a communication barrier, but like I said, one of the things that we're taught in our mental health trainings now is like, hey, it's okay to be direct. I know for a long time they told us, no, like, don't ask straight on because it's going to encourage. And what we found out more and more is that it actually doesn't encourage it. It acts as an interrupter itself, to where
mm,
people are like, oh, shoot, you see me, right? And so in that, there's definitely some power there too.
mhm. Okay, I think I'll play music just for a few minutes just to allow people to ask questions if they need to, but if you're ready to log off, feel free. But thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And thanks, Richard, so much for sharing your story and sharing advice on how we can get through
Absolutely.
the
I just want to
season.
say thank you to you too, and thank you to the rest of the Bird Bar Play staff. You all are actually my final speech for 2022. So definitely happy and blessed to be able to end it with you all, and grateful that I got a chance to be with some Washington State family for my last speech of the year. So thank you all.